The sky was too blue for what she carried inside her. He noticed that first. Not her torn shawl, not the way her boots dragged lines in the dust, not even the dried blood darkening the sleeve of her dress. It was the sky above her that felt wrong. Too clean, too forgiving. The mountain man stood near the creek with his rifle resting against a stone, beard rough as pine bark, eyes sharp as winter. She stumbled before she reached the water. Caleb caught her by instinct, not kindness. Her body was light, trembling as if fear had hollowed her out. When she looked up at him, her eyes did not plead. They had gone past pleading days ago. He lowered her gently onto a rock, offered water. She drank like someone afraid it might be taken away. Minutes passed. Wind moved through the grass. A hawk circled high above, patient. Then he asked it. Not loud, not angry. Who hurt you? The question landed between them like thunder waiting to break. Her mouth opened, closed. Her hands clenched the fabric at her chest as if holding herself together took all her strength. When she finally spoke, her voice came thin and cracked. Amen, she said. They wear badges. They say God rides with them. Something old and buried shifted inside Caleb. A memory, sharp and unwelcome. Years ago, he had buried his wife beneath a cedar tree, her hands still bruised, the law having looked the other way. He looked up at the endless blue stretching over the mountains. Under God's sky, men still did terrible things. He rose to his full height and picked up his rifle. Then God won't mind, he said quietly, if I ride first. Caleb did not pray the way churchmen prayed. He prayed by action. At dawn, he packed his horse with provisions and wrapped the woman's wounded arm in clean cloth. Her name was Eliza. She had been taken from a homestead near Red Hollow, a place already known for disappearing women and men who ask questions. I don't want blood, she whispered as he saddled the horse. Caleb tightened the strap, jaw set. Neither did I, he replied. Once, they rode beneath clouds stretched thin like old scars. Along the way, Eliza spoke in pieces, names half remembered, laughter that had followed cruelty. A jailhouse with no prisoners and a church with locked doors. Every word fed the fire. By nightfall, they camped near a ridge overlooking Red Hollow. Lantern light flickered below, warm and false. Caleb watched the town the way a wolf watches sheep, not with hunger, but with certainty. He knelt in the dirt, pressed his palm to the earth, and bowed his head. If there's judgment, he murmured to the dark, let it come through me. The first man fell without a sound, then the second. The badge meant nothing. The gun in Caleb's hand spoke clearer law than any paper ever had. By sunrise, whispers would crawl through Red Hollow like snakes. The mountain man had come down. The sky changed color as the town woke. Men gathered, angry and afraid. Guns came out. Prayers followed, spoken too late and for the wrong reasons. Caleb walked into the street alone. No shouting, no speeches, just boots on dirt and eyes that had already buried too many souls. You think you're justice? The sheriff barked, shaking behind his star. Caleb looked past him, toward the church with its locked doors. No, he said. I think justice died here a long time ago. The gunfire was brief, final. When it was over, the wind moved again, brushing dust over blood like the land itself was tired of watching. Eliza stood at the edge of town, free but forever changed. She watched Caleb ride away without asking his name. Some people were not meant to be known, only remembered. Up in the mountains, Caleb stopped at the ridge and looked back one last time. God's sky stretched endlessly above him, silent, watching. He tipped his hat, not in pride, not in regret, just acknowledgement. The question had been asked. The oath had been kept. And under that wide, unblinking sky, vengeance had passed for justice once more. The sky was too blue for what she carried inside her. Caleb Holt noticed that before anything else, the mountains stood quiet, pine shadows stretching toward the creek, the world looking almost gentle. It felt wrong. A sky that clean had no right to watch what walked beneath it. He stood near the water, rifle leaned against a rock, hands rough and still. Years alone had taught him how to listen without moving. When he heard the soft crunch of boots on gravel, he turned slowly. She came out of the trees like someone released too early from a storm. Her dress was torn at the hem, stained dark at the sleeve. One shoe dragged. Her hair hung loose, tangled, as if fingers had yanked it free. But it was her eyes that stopped him. They weren't wide with fear. They were empty, like fear had already burned through and left nothing behind. She took 3 more steps and folded. Caleb moved without thinking. He caught her before she struck the ground, surprised by how light she was, as though pain had eaten her from the inside. He lowered her onto a flat stone by the creek and knelt. She flinched when his hand brushed her arm. "It's water," he said quietly. He held the canteen to her lips. She drank too fast, coughing, then drank again, clutching the metal like it might disappear. When she finally stopped, she stared at the flowing creek, not at him. Time passed. Wind stirred the grass. Somewhere high above, a hawk cried. Caleb had not spoken more than necessary for years, but the silence pressed heavy now. He studied the bruises blooming along her wrist, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was bracing for another blow. The words came out of him before he could bury them. Her fingers trembled against the stone. For a long moment he thought she would not answer. Then her voice slipped out, thin and cracked. "Amen," she said. "Amen with guns and badges. They said they were keeping order. They said God understood." Something cold and old shifted inside Caleb, a memory he had nailed shut long ago. His wife's hands, purple marks, a town that looked away, a sky just as blue. He lifted his eyes to the open heavens stretching over the mountains, wide and silent. Under God's sky, cruelty still wore clean faces. Caleb stood and took his rifle in hand. "Then God won't mind," he said softly, more promise than threat. "If I ride first." Dawn broke pale and cold, spilling light over the ridge like a quiet warning. Caleb Holt was already awake, feeding the fire with a practiced hand. Sleep had barely touched him. Old memories rode too close now, stirred loose by a single question he hadn't meant to ask. The woman sat wrapped in a blanket near the flames. Her name was Eliza. She had given it to him in a whisper, like she was unsure it still belonged to her. Her wounded arm was bound in clean cloth. The bleeding slowed, the pain dulled but not gone. She watched Caleb the way a person watches weather, uncertain when it might turn. He saddled the horse without hurry. Every strap, every buckle was checked twice. This was not a ride taken in anger. It was taken in certainty. "I don't want anyone else hurt because of me," Eliza said quietly. Caleb did not look at her. He tightened the cinch and tested it with a hard pull. "They already chose that," he replied. "Not you." They rode as the sun climbed, moving through open grassland and broken rock. Eliza spoke in fragments, never all at once. A homestead near Red Hollow. A knock at the door after dark. Men who smiled while holding guns. A badge flashed like a blessing. A jailhouse with empty cells and a church that stayed locked except on Sundays. Caleb listened, each word settling heavy inside him. The land changed as they traveled. Trees thinned, dust rose. The air itself felt tighter, like it knew what waited ahead. By evening they reached a ridge overlooking Red Hollow. Lanterns glowed below, warm and false, painting the town in the colors of safety it did not deserve. Caleb studied the layout in silence. The sheriff's office, the saloon. The church standing dark at the edge, its doors shut. He dismounted and knelt, pressing his palm to the dirt. The earth was cool, steady. It had seen worse men than those below and would see worse still. "If there's judgment," he murmured, voice barely louder than the wind, "let it pass through me." Eliza stood behind him, fear and hope tangled together in her gaze. She did not ask him to stop. She knew better. Caleb rose, his decision settled like stone. As night fell and the town laughed and drank beneath its borrowed light, the mountain man moved down the slope, quiet as a shadow, carrying an oath no badge could outrun. Morning crept into Red Hollow like it had no business being there. Pale light slid across the dirt street, catching the smoke that still hung in the air, thin as breath leaving a body. The town was awake but not alive. Doors stood open. Windows watched without blinking. Men gathered in small knots, hands close to their guns, voices low and brittle. Caleb Holt walked down the center of the street alone. His boots struck the ground with steady purpose. No rush. No hesitation. The rifle rested easy in his hands, as familiar as an old truth. He felt the weight of eyes on him, the kind that judged and feared at the same time. The sheriff stepped out from the office, his badge catching the light like it wanted to be noticed. His hand shook as it hovered near his holster. "Do you think you're some kind of justice?" The man called out, trying to sound firm. Caleb stopped. He looked past the sheriff toward the church at the edge of town, its doors locked tight, its steeple pointing skyward as if accusing the clouds. "No," Caleb said. "Justice left this place years ago." The first shot cracked the air, sharp and desperate. It was answered quickly. The sound echoed off the buildings, then fell away into silence. When the dust settled, the sheriff lay still, the badge dulled by dirt. No cheers followed, no prayers either. The wind moved through Red Hollow, pushing dust over the blood in the street like the land itself was tired of holding on to it. Women stepped out cautiously. A child cried somewhere, then was pulled back inside. Eliza stood at the edge of town, watching from a distance. Her arm was still bound, her face pale, but she was standing. For the first time, she stood without fear curling her spine. She met Caleb's eyes once. He nodded. That was all there was to say. He did not stay to explain. He did not wait for thanks. Caleb mounted his horse and rode out as the sun climbed higher, washing the town in a light it had not earned. Behind him, Red Hollow began to breathe again, unsure what it had survived. At the ridge, he stopped and looked back. The town was small from up here, already shrinking into the land that would one day forget it. Above him, God's sky stretched wide and silent, offering no blessing and no condemnation. Caleb removed his hat and held it against his chest for a moment, not in pride, not in regret, but in acknowledgement of what had passed. The question had been asked. The oath had been kept. And beneath that endless sky, the mountain man turned his horse toward the high country, carrying the weight of justice alone once more. The mountains took him back without question. Caleb rode until Red Hollow vanished behind folds of land and distance, until the air grew thinner and the silence deeper. Up here, the world did not ask what a man had done. It only asked if he could endure. Pines leaned in the wind. Snow lingered in the shadows like an old memory that refused to melt. He made camp near a narrow pass as dusk settled. The fire burned low, its light small against the dark walls of stone. For the first time since he'd come down from the high country, Caleb felt the weight of what he carried settle fully into his chest. Not guilt, not regret, something quieter, something heavier. Faces returned to him in fragments. The sheriff's eyes when certainty finally broke. The silence of the church, Eliza standing straighter than pain should allow. He wondered if the town would change or simply learn to hide better. Towns had a way of healing wrong. The wind shifted. Hooves sounded on rock. Caleb's hand went to his rifle before thought caught up. A rider emerged from the trees, slow, deliberate, hands visible. A woman this time, older than Eliza, harder around the eyes, dust-coated and tired in a way that spoke of long roads. They say the mountain man came down, she continued. They say he asked one question and ended a rain. She dismounted, her gaze steady. A me sister vanished near Dry Creek last spring. Same badges, same sermons. The fire popped softly between them. Caleb looked at her, then really looked. He saw the same hollow place he had seen in Eliza, carved deeper by time and waiting. He exhaled slowly. I'm not a cure, he said. She nodded. I'm not asking for one. I'm asking where to start. The sky above them was ink black now, crowded with stars sharp enough to cut. Caleb felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the sense that the trail beneath his feet was shifting again. He stood and added wood to the fire. Sparks climbed upward, vanishing into the dark. That first light, he said. We ride north. There are places like Red Hollow. Fewer people talk about them. The woman's shoulders sagged. Not in relief, but resolve. As night wrapped the mountains tighter, Caleb Holt understood something he had not allowed himself before. The question he'd asked was no longer his alone, and under God's vast watching sky, the mountain man's ride was not yet finished.